Okay, so I'm Jodi Balma, and I appreciate all of you coming here. This is a public administration perspective, not a political perspective. So I have a master's in public administration, and I consulted with our colleague who teaches public administration here, because what we're talking about is governance. What we're talking about are the rules of elections, not the campaigning, not the people who are involved. So those questions that were listed on the RSVP, I'm not addressing. I'm addressing the structural questions and trying to go over what a charter is and what the process Fullerton will follow. So what we're talking about with a charter, we're going to go over each of these. We're going to have a breakout session where you can share your concerns about charters. We saw that in public comments at the city council meetings in March, in May, in June. Was that just June 3rd? So I want to give you space, and I have incredible moderators of our breakout sessions, Joanne Foley and Jodi Vallejo, who will help talk about some of these questions. So if, as we're going through the informational part, you have questions, we're going to discuss those in the breakout room, and then we're going to come back and do a share out. I'm going to talk more about the timeline, and then we'll have questions and an evaluation. So you can share if you want next steps, if you want more information. And I'm going to ask you to share the recording with the people who aren't here, because we're very early in this process, and there are a lot of people who, it turns out, are not obsessed with city council meetings. So they don't know that this is happening yet. So we have a long runway of sharing information. So what is a charter city? That's the central question we want to answer tonight. And I heard a lot of fear and anxiety in the public comments, and that's one of the reasons that I want to do this, because a charter is neither good nor bad, right? It's just a city constitution. And we often are taught about the United States Constitutional Convention of 1787. This is more like the California Constitution. So we are currently, Fullerton, a general law city. The question on the ballot will be to switch to a charter city with the rules written there that you can either agree with or not, vote for or not. But the charter itself isn't good or bad. So 121 charter cities in California, and much like the California Constitution, and if you voted in California for more than 5 minutes, you've been asked whether or not you want to amend the California Constitution, because it is significantly easier than amending the United States Constitution. Anybody want to guess how many amendments there are to the California Constitution that you are allowed to vote and change on almost any ballot? November ballot, general election ballot. So the United States Constitution, just for comparison, has 27. 10 of those were the Bill of Rights. So in 250 years, we've had 17. One of those is to not drink, the other one is to drink, and 5 of them are about voting. Who gets to vote? So compared to the United States Constitution with 27, how many does California have? 1. More than 500 is correct. We change it all the time. And so you too can change whatever charter you have in one of these cities with a charter amendment on the ballot. That's how things get changed. So what we're talking about right now is, what will the initial charter be? What will the rules and regulations be? And then those things could be changed through an amendment process. So one of the complications that sometimes we don't know the answer to is, does a charter city have the ability to do X? Ignore state rules on housing. We have to go to court. We don't always know. So I'm going to show you what we do know between home rule and statewide concern. So charter cities can decide whatever they want about home rule, and they cannot violate what the state and the courts decide is a statewide concern. So home rule 4 core areas in the California Constitution, and the League of California Cities gives us lots of information, and we have a California Supreme Court case to decide that says charter cities have dominion over municipal affairs, city governance structures, regulation of local matters, and fiscal control. They do not have the ability to violate state law on an issue that has been determined by the California Constitution or the courts as an area of statewide concern. So Subdivision Map Act, affordable housing state mandates, vehicle code regulation of what you do with your city streets, environmental quality laws, and tort claims against the cities. So again, these are all listed in League of California Cities, and we can see court case after court case to some charter cities that want to exceed or test the limits of statewide concern. A lot of these are about housing. Some of them are about environmental protection laws. I don't know why my mic is cutting out, but we'll go with it. So the courts get to decide that. I'm going to give you an example of general law versus home rule to kind of explain how this can work. A little like the United States minimum wage is lower than what California state has. We cannot go lower than the national minimum wage, but we can go higher. So the same way, a general law city, the California state law sets a maximum based on the population, so I chose Fullerton's. If your city is 75,000 to 150,000 people, you can pay your city council member up to, but not exceed, $1,900 per month. Fullerton pays $750 per month plus city benefits. You know, a lot of them qualify just like school boards for the healthcare package that the district office, those things. And then regional boards. If you represent the city of Fullerton on the Orange County Water Authority or the Power, you can sometimes get additional stipends for those meetings. That's not included in the state law. So Senate Bill number 329, and you can see this at legislature.com, says a general law city cannot exceed that amount. If you become a charter city, you can. You would have to put it in your charter, and if it's not in the initial charter, you would have to ask the people on a ballot to increase that. So Santa Ana tried in November 2024 to increase their package by asking the people if, and I felt like this was a little shady and not transparent, to not say the dollar amount on the ballot, but to say a third of what an Orange County Superior Court judge makes. Now, most of us don't have that number in our head and would not know that you are agreeing to pay your city council $78,000, which is more than the median income for the people who live in Santa Ana. Not surprising, that information got out to the voters and they rejected it. So when your city tries to amend the charter in a way you don't want, you have the power of the vote to say, no, you cannot make $78,000 a year. So they did, 66% said no. So public administration, if you can just write down the question, we'll get back to it. And if you need a pen, I can get you one. So I just want to talk for a minute, because I have a captive audience, about some things that aren't part of that balance between home rule and statewide concern. These are often variables between cities that have a huge impact over governance that we don't really think about because most of us only live in one city and don't really compare other local cities. So you might not know that while Fullerton has term limits, La Habra doesn't. You might not know that while Fullerton has district elections, La Habra doesn't. You might not know that some cities elect their mayor and some don't, just rotating. So I just want to go over that to show that isn't determined by going to a charter city. You can, with general law, have that. So term limits. Both charter city and general law can set term limits and change them. That's not determined by switching to a charter city. So in Fullerton, effective 2010, council members may serve 3 successive 4-year terms and then are ineligible to serve again until 4 years have passed. Other cities have strict 2 terms and out forever. Others, La Habra, has no term limits. So that isn't determined by charter or general law. Same thing for at-large elections. Since most Orange County cities use district elections because of the legal challenges from the California Voting Rights Act, some have not been sued by Kevin Shankman. Some have chosen to go to avoid a lawsuit that is often very costly. A whole bunch of the Lagunas haven't even bothered. So that is not determined by charter, city, or general law. Elected mayors. Some elected mayors have 2-year terms. They're on the ballot every cycle. Some are 4-year terms. But we have both charter cities and general law. I could do a whole lecture on the problem with elected mayors. If you would like to come to another workshop about the danger from a public administration perspective of a city that has a council manager with a city manager as the full-time head of the city staff being co-opted and challenged by an elected mayor. And if you see, some of these cities have had the FBI, have had massive lawsuits, struggle to recruit public administrators who do not want to work in toxic environments with pay-for-play political deals that bring the FBI. And I encourage you to Google any of these cities with bankrupt. So that is not determined by charter city. That's simply a choice that the city can make, whether they're general law or a charter city. So this is the Fullerton City Charter timeline. On June 3rd, the City Council of Fullerton, by 3-2 vote, chose, of the 3 options California state law allows for a charter city, they chose the council-drafted charter with a committee chosen by council appointees. So specifically, they did not mandate that each district had to have a representative on the advisory committee. The council is by district, and so each district, each of the 5 districts of the city will have a representative through their council, but you could, hypothetically, not in actuality, but you could have 5 people that live in the same house be appointed by those 5 council members and not be representative of this district. I'm in no way saying that's what's going to happen, but just be aware that there will be 5 representatives. So this is from the city council meeting of June 3rd, the timeline that I'm just offering for your information. The next step will be that the council appoints the advisory group, so each of the 5 will appoint. That committee, under the directive of the council, with input from the council, will draft the charter by April. And then there'll be a 21-day notice given. There'll be a first public hearing, save the date, May 5th. Then a second public hearing, then a vote at the city council on whether or not to take that drafted charter and vote to put it on the November 2026 ballot for the voters to then approve or not. So that's the timeline. A number of questions from the RSVPs asked about the cost. So there are known costs and there are unknown costs. The known costs from the June 3rd City Council meeting is that the Orange County Registrar of Voters says it costs, they will charge $8,500 to place that measure on the municipal ballot, because we're already voting for city council on that ballot. So it's not an additional cost that it would be if you had a special election or you put it on the June election where there isn't a municipal. The unknown costs, and they are truly unknown, are whether or not the city attorney will be in charge of reviewing the legal language, whether or not an outside attorney will be hired as a consultant, whether there will be a consultant to draft the charter. It is absolutely not a requirement or necessary, but some city councils hire a consultant. That's a cost. Then you have public outreach, meetings for those 2 meetings, information, there has to be a website, all of those sorts of things. Again, these are all unknown costs. They could be nominal, they could be a lot. It all depends on what the council votes for. And then not insignificant is the staff's time that will be spent on this. And so when we talk about staff time as a zero-sum game, any minute that they spend on this is a minute they can't spend on something else, just to be aware. So I don't know the cost. Who serves on the advisory group? So each council member will appoint. They have discretion to do that. There's no restriction by district and no timeline yet given. It is early days. They just approved this last week. So I don't know when they'll be appointing, but I assume they will get that started relatively soon. What should a charter contain? So the National Civic League, which is one of the resources and references that I give you on that green piece of paper for further review, is a model charter. What should a charter have? Again, it's like a constitution. You don't have to have all of those things. You can have all of these things. This is just public administrators helpfully telling you what you should to have a good one. You can ignore us. People often do. But this would be a nice design to make sure you're covering everything. Because when you write a bad constitution, the courts get involved. And so that adds to the cost when there are legal challenges. So those 121 charters, some are really long, San Francisco, and some are really short. I say Buena Park is 2 pages, but honestly, if I had assigned 2 pages, I would not give them credit for the second page. So they're the shortest, but it's functional for Buena Park. So there's no right answer to how long a charter needs to be. And obviously there are great variances in how those charters are written, what they contain, how detailed they get, and how many times they change. San Francisco changes a lot. So I want to give some examples of bad charter provisions. And then I'll give you positive things about good charter provisions that I, as a public administrator, would love to see in a model charter. But first, let's talk about the cities that go on the bad list. So some charters use this autonomy to pay themselves more than state law allows. So the city of Bell, we do love a case study. So they had a special election in a low information voter turnout city where most of the working poor of their city did not pay attention. 334 people showed up to vote and got them in all this trouble. So don't have a special election. That's cautionary tale number 1. And then pay attention when they rob you blind and start paying their staff $1 million to keep them quiet about how much they're paying their own council. The only reason we found out about it is because one of the 5 council members that was getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars lost his election and threatened to tell if they didn't find a way to keep paying him. So they did, and so the new councilman just got the old amount of $800 a month. But he was super happy when the FBI came, and the rest of the council and staff ended up with felony financial fraud charges. So we had a massive recall. Some went to jail. Some lost their seats. some unceremoniously retired, and they had to start from scratch, and they had to change their charter to make sure that that never happened. Some of the good provisions that I'm gonna show you are because bad things happened and they wanted to fix those. Just like my syllabus keeps adding things because students try to take advantage. So the city of Vernon, they allowed appointments without public oversight, and so they got on our naughty list. The mayor was convicted of voter fraud and corruption. The city managers were convicted of felony fraud charges. Powerful positions were filled with cronies and minimal electoral accountability. So, oh, by the way, so the thing here that I put is, how do you avoid that? You put in your charter defined limits or approval for compensation. The way you avoid becoming a Vernon is to make sure that your charter has safeguards that can ensure transparent merit-based appointments, right? So we see the example of how it can go wrong, and the charter can provide a way to stop that. Public participation limitations. Some charters allow minimal public notice or restrict comment periods. You don't have to have a charter city to do that. I'm slightly annoyed that the North Orange County Community College School District puts the public comments at the end of the meeting, which means people have to wait for hours to an unspecified time. You don't have to be a charter city to do that. You can limit democracy and public participation in other ways, but a charter allows you to do that really effectively. And so you want to make sure that your charter allows for open public participation. You can read the San Diego Tribune for all of the ways they violated the Brown Act, which you can't violate with the Charter Act, which is why they got in trouble. San Diego decided to pay their contractors less than the prevailing wage, so they got in trouble because their charter allowed that to happen. They successfully argued against paying prevailing wages in some cases because their charter allowed that as exceptions. So you would want in a model charter to include protections so that the prevailing wages on city contracts is protected. Those values of your city should be reflected in the charter. Land use and zoning discretion is a huge reason that charter cities try to violate statewide mandates. So Palo Alto, Carson, Whittier, Huntington Beach have all gone to court and successfully had rulings that they can avoid some of the statewide restrictions, but not all. So again, have to go to court. But you want to include in your charter a balance between local control. I certainly in Brea, where I live, do not want skyscrapers to go up in my neighborhood. That local control and home rule should be part of land use and zoning ordinance that cities have traditionally been in charge with. However, the state of California has an affordable housing crisis, and so they have put mandates in, partially to protect cities that have less political power from being the places that are forced to take huge, dense developments, while places like Huntington Beach City Council can argue that it is a privilege to live at the coast and the poor people shouldn't. Well, that's why they end up in court. Those are inside thoughts. So, campaign finance loopholes. Some charters don't set limits or allow contractor contributions. So you want to reflect the values to say that, hey, we could have better campaign finance rules with our charter. That's one of the ways to do that. So should the charter include campaign contribution bans or limits? I'll show you some examples of cities that have done that. All of this is in the National Charter League Model City Charter. These are the values they believe in. Seems good. Transparency, good. Ethics, good. Campaign finance limits, good. Transparency, good. Administrative efficiency, allowing your content experts who you have hired as public administrators for your city to do their jobs, good. And civic engagement, we want the public to be involved. So these are good values to have reflected in your charter. The League of California Cities, of which Fullerton is a dues-paying member, take advantage of their resources. They've got a charter toolkit. Let's do that instead of hiring a consultant. They have procedures for charter adoption. They've got sample city charters from the 121 cities. You can get really good ideas. And the pros and cons of charter cities, all at calcities.org. So let's talk about some examples that I found that were really good and I like. A gift ban sounds like a good place to include in your charter of who can and can't contribute to campaign finance. So that's something to consider. Temple City has a really good one to look at, but there are multiple. The Institute for Local Government has a lot of references, but honestly, there's so many examples that when I put multiple there as the source, lots to choose from. Pick the language you like. A charter provision that has a public ethics commission, that's becoming more common. Again, trying to solve problems that are, trying to have solutions to problems that they discover going along the way. And so Oakland has, you will not be surprised to discover, a very progressive ethics commission. And then Pomona has kind of a more moderate one for a police oversight commission. They have had massive problems with police overstepping what the city residents want. And so they have added a police oversight commission to their charter, needed. Election campaign spending, Berkeley has a pretty severe limit on who can donate money. No labor unions, no corporations that have business with the city. Contributions are limited to $250, full transparency. Pacific Grove has a ban on contributions for anyone but individuals. So that's something to consider. Public financing of elections. Oakland hasn't started this yet, but I'm kind of fascinated that they have developers pay basically a tax that then funds public elections. And the idea is that they give a voucher to the voters, and then the voters can hand the voucher to the candidate they like. So it's public financing through democracy. It's wild. I don't know if it's going to work, but let them go first. Let's see what happens. Los Angeles bans pay-to-play politics. They have certainly had pay-to-play politics, so it is necessary to ban what has happened, and so you want to prevent those contractors from influencing city officials. Participatory budgeting in the city of Vallejo. Torrance has competitive bidding requirements that ensures transparency. Multiple cities have multilingual outreach. Some have a requirement that ASL translations are at all city council meetings and events, multilingual outreach available. So there are lots of elements and provisions that you can place in a charter that seem like really good ideas. Multiple have specific outreach to underrepresented residents, making a good faith outreach for community events, redistricting, and commission appointments. And you know, when I first started teaching local politics, I said, maybe Brea could have a commissioner that's under 60, a little bit of diversity on age, maybe somebody on the planning commission that isn't a developer or a realtor, because those were the only two occupations that ever were appointed. So just lots of different kinds of underrepresented residents when we think a little bit outside the box. Carson had a big problem with nepotism, so they easily passed an anti-nepotism policy, an amendment to their charter, to the third degree, which you can learn more about what that means and who is prevented. So, you've listened to me talk for a long time. And so I want you to sort of reflect on this. We're gonna go and move. And this side of the room is gonna go with whoever's across the hall. I don't know what. Joanne is gonna lead you across the hall to do some breakout work on these two questions. And then once you've left, okay, Jodi's gonna take you across the hall. So stand up, we're coming back, but you can take or leave your stuff, but we'll be back to share out.
And so, like I'm sure the other breakout group did, we looked at concerns and we also looked at ideas. And then I had each group put up on our whiteboard the things that they were most concerned about as well as their ideas. So I'm going to share out, and you could look more closely at these later for their other good ideas. But their concerns were, first of all, ambiguity of language in the charter itself, or just lack of clarity. So as people were reading the proposed charter, could they understand it? And because you don't want tons of jargon, you don't want what seems to be conflicting information. So that was a concern, a top concern.
Joanne?
Yes.
One other part of that is the ambiguity of language, so that the council interprets it differently than the public does.
Good. And if you didn't hear that clarification, it's that the language is so ambiguous that the council has that, I'll use the word flexibility, to interpret it one way, and the public may have believed that the intent was something else, and that's what they were voting on. So it's that ambiguity as well. Also concerns about the salaries of council members, the term limits of council members. What would that look like? Would the current term limit law change? Would the current salaries change? And so that was a big concern. Another was, the selection process for writing the charter and equity in representation. And so, and this says no corruption. Oh, and a concern that there would be a corrupted process from the outset. And so that was one of the top concerns. And then the final top concern, and again, there are many very valid concerns here, is the concentration of power among elected officials. And we had a little conversation about elected officials who may or may not know anything about governance, know anything about running a city, have any experience or knowledge or education, but are then attempting to do so. And so that was a concern. Now, their ideas were also amazing. One idea was to limit campaign contributions to Fullerton residents and also cap them at $250. Another was concern about pay to play, where you have an entity, let's say a developer or road construction or something like that, where they're giving lots of money with the wink, wink understanding that they're going to get the contract. Then there was also concern about open meetings, publication, or public, God bless you, advertisement of the meetings surrounding the charter, information. They really want to see that pushed out so that there are many avenues of reaching people and many opportunities for questions to be asked and answered. And establishment of an ethics commission. So the point being that this collaborative effort is what we'd like to see, of course, in the development of a charter. But thank you to my team here who did such a wonderful job. And now I'm going to turn it over to, as we call it, Jodi with a Y.
There we go.
So.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Jodi, for hosting this
Absolutely.
public event. Big thanks also to the students who helped us facilitate this. So we had many of the same concerns as your group, Joanne. Thank you so much to my group over here on the right, the better group. No, I'm just kidding. Everybody's amazing.
Well, healthy
I'm just
competition.
Teasing. I'm just teasing. But we do have the larger group over there on the right. But one of the biggest concerns, and I don't know if this came up in your group, Joanne, I'd actually be curious, but why do we even need a charter at all? So that was the biggest concern that was fundamentally the thread running through many of the comments. People did not feel that the rationale behind the charter was actually fully justified. And because there's a lack of trust in the council members, because of the increasingly draconian policies that are being implemented that people perceive as being implemented to silence the community or to not listen to the community or to not actually represent the community, there's a lot of distrust. And that is something that's very concerning when you are thinking about governing a city. And so one of the biggest concerns was, why do we even need a charter? Who is writing the charter? And will the public actually have real input, or will any public input be ignored in the writing of a charter? Those were also concerns and fears that people had. People had concerns around litigation, increased litigation costs, just looking at what has already happened in other cities that have implemented charters, in particular cities in the general vicinity. People were very concerned in that same vein around ethical misconduct and a charter being written that allows for the consolidation of power, something that Joanne also mentioned as well. A lack of checks and balances of power, not listening to our city staff who are working very, very hard in our city, or relegating the city manager to a position that's diminutive and lacking in power. And so there was a lot of concerns about ethical misconduct by those who might draft a charter, along with election concerns. Will they change election dates? Will they hold special elections in order to disenfranchise people in Fullerton? And again, just costs, how a charter would be enforced, special interests supporting the funding in either direction of the charter. So special interests coming into Fullerton and trying to wield power for further benefit. And then also, somebody also mentioned keeping the independence of the library board of trustees. It was kind of funny because when we were talking about what you might want to see in a charter, a lot of folks in our group said, well, we don't even want to see a charter because we don't have an actual rationale for why we might want a charter or why we might even need a charter. But some of the things that people would want around the process of creating a charter were a very significant public awareness campaign around the charter. So how are we going to make sure that we have representative input around the charter beyond just the committee that would be appointed by individual council people, including town halls with council and reps, access to information, websites, social media updates, very strong public outreach. People would want to see transparency and actually feel like they're being listened to when they speak up about what they might want to see in a charter in public forums. And they'd like access to their reps, and also people who might serve in capacities of drafting the charter, and other things like considerations around gerrymandering in the city. Will districts be something that is tried to be eliminated? Could we codify the mayoral rotation in a charter city? There was also concerns about representation and the elimination of representation in terms of our districts and our district elections. So first and foremost, why do we need a charter? Who would actually be writing a charter, and that it would be fair? And somebody in our room said that you would want a fair, just, and equitable charter that anybody who was in any form of office in our city or who had any political orientation would think that the charter was fair. that would represent the voices. So a nonpartisan charter that didn't benefit any particular political party or interests in the city, where any person, regardless of political affiliation or majority on the council, would think that the charter is
Great.
fair.
Nice. Okay. Thank you. The ideal charter, according to everybody, is that it reflects community concerns, that it's transparent, accountable, ethical, that there are safeguards against corruption, and that it improves city governance. So, those are the goals. What if you oppose the charter? What if after all of this, what if after the timeline, what if after it's drafted, you don't like it? Vote against it. That's how democracy works. It'll be on the ballot and the voters get to choose. So, if it's on the November 3rd, 2026, according to the timeline that was announced June 3rd, vote against it. If it's delayed for reasons I'm not in control of, vote against it then. And maybe you'll love it. Who knows? There's also an alternate charter. So at the meeting, two provisions for charters were discussed. City staff did a great job of the comparison and showed the cost involved with a commission where 15 residents would run on the ballot, be chosen, and then draft. The council rejected that and chose the council drafted. There's a third. There's a third way to do a charter that very few cities do. But you can have a citizens' referendum, welcome to direct democracy of California. With enough signatures, you can do just about anything. If you wanted to get 12,000 signatures, you could put an alternate charter on the ballot. Go for it. There are many failed charters. Obviously, there are 121 successful charters. But I also want to point out electoral reality that not all charters pass. And the examples of cities with failed charters tend to be charters that are not written with ethical, transparent provisions that improve city governance. There's distrust of council, and so when it goes on the ballot, the voters reject it. Okay, reject it. And often, by pretty big margins, they reject it. I couldn't find any, except for Escondido, where it was close. For those of you who press refresh on OC Vote on election night, you know 64% you go to sleep. 52% you stay up for the 11 o'clock refresh. So some of these failed really spectacularly. And others you can kind of see. And when I looked, you could see pretty common themes in newspaper reports. I didn't call everybody. I didn't talk to the campaigns against it. But newspaper reports of those failed charters had some common themes. That there was distrust of council, that they didn't like the charter. And, one of the most powerful political tools to kill a bill is to just say, this one's not good enough. And people are like, yeah, I want a better one. Okay, well, so sometimes the cities come back and eventually pass a better charter, but that's up to the voters to decide whether or not the charter that is eventually drafted meets your standards of what would improve city governance or not, but you get a vote. Oh, this is also something. Some cities that have trust and did a good job of public engagement, there is no campaign against them. Sometimes the campaign is from special interest groups that don't like ethical, transparent, and just charters. So be aware that not every failed charter, now I couldn't find any of those failed charters in California, but I'm sure they exist, and it's a national issue, so there are instances. But I'm a California girl. These are the pretty common causes of failed charters. Back to the Fullerton process and timeline, just so you can review to kind of know where we're headed. If what was said on June 3rd is still true, this is the timeline, and if it changes, we'll update you. And it might change, I don't know. The Fullerton municipal elections, for those of you not already obsessed with 2026 local elections, just to remind you, this is what you'll see. And one of the comments at the city council meeting, which I thought was pretty astute, is, hey, maybe you don't want to put sales tax measures on the same ballot where people are actively campaigning against a charter because they say they don't trust you, and you're asking for money to fix the damn roads. Which, personal point, if your city ever does fix the roads, I'm not sure what my students will study for their community problem. It's the easiest example on the first day of class of how many of you have had hit a pothole on your way. Okay, you could do that for your study. I will survive though. Fix your roads. My daughter, when she was learning to drive, could tell me when we hit a Fullerton road from Placentia, Brea, or Buena Park. She's like, oh, that's Fullerton. Yeah, that's how bad your roads are. So, Fullerton School District has 3. Not all of these. Obviously, they only appear on your ballot if there is a challenger. So not all of these will necessarily appear, but they will all be up for election. So Fullerton School District, areas 1, 3, and 4. Fullerton Joint Union High School District 1, 4, and 5. North Orange County Community College, just area 6, that covers Fullerton. There are others. Then Fullerton City Council 3 and 5. And then possible sales tax measures in this same kind of timeline of, even though the council has said they want to consider them, it's a long time before they officially tell the registrar of voters they're going to put them on. But possible 2 different sales tax measures, and then this would be a possible charter city. So there is, I'm not going to comment about it tonight, but there is a political campaign strategy that you could consider for, does this doom the other things you want to do? Does it distract? I don't know. That's for residents to decide, but just FYI. And then what the decision will usually come down to is, do people trust the charter that is drafted to improve city governance with opportunity? When that happens, the charters usually pass, hence 121 cities with charters. If voters distrust the council, distrust the motives, distrust the process, and do not like the drafted product, they will consider that risk, and voters tend to be risk adverse, and they can choose to vote against it. That's the decision that will face the voters when we're there. There's a lot of hypotheticals between now and then. So, Wong and Aiden, if you can come up and grab, if you want to be all techie, you can do the evaluation with this QR code. Those of you watching from home, you can't get a piece of paper, so you need to do a QR code. And you can take that. The incentive for those who are watching later is that that evaluation also collects your information if you want to be informed about future workshops, future educational sessions. The public information will keep people updated. And I can send you the video. If you RSVP'd, I already have your email. If not, you can just log on to this evaluation and give it to me. I'll send you, when the Fullerton Observer has it ready, and any of those references hyperlinked that you have on the green paper, because it's just easier. So, after you do the evaluation, while you're doing the evaluation, what questions do you have? What I tried to answer from the I think I answered, but you might not agree with me. I think I answered the questions from the RSVP link about general questions about the charter that lots of you had, the cost of the election that lots of you had, process and oversight that lots of you had, governance and power structures. And as we saw in the breakout sessions, a lot of you had questions about motive, why, what's the rationale? I don't know. That's a concern. That's why we had the breakout room. But if you have a question that's not answered or you want more detail, I am happy to answer those. If you will go to the mic, I'm happy to take them.
Good evening, I'm ZJ. I had my hand up pretty early.
I
You
know.
had a slide about Santa Ana and
Sure.
the vote about paying their council members 1/3 of a district court.
Yeah.
My question only was that a 50+1 to fail or pass?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure. If I'd known you were going to be that succinct, I would have let you talk. Some people filibuster with a question and I get off track. Yeah, and if you would like to Google that, the Voice of OC, really interesting quotes where one of the council members said that even though they're part-time, they work more than full-time and that they should be paid more than a fast food worker, which went over really well in Santa Ana.
I had a question about
Sure.
amending
Yes.
the charter. Is it required that all charters have to be amended by a vote by the voters, or can you put in a charter that the council can amend the charter?
Yeah, so almost all charters that have passed, that I looked at, have an amendment provision. And in that, I'm going to just click to it. Way back here. Is charter amendment should be slideshow. It should contain it. It doesn't mean all of them do, but you should have a provision for making an amendment. If you take Political Science 100 American Government with me, I'll talk about the failed Articles of Confederation that required unanimous consent and therefore was never amended and failed spectacularly and was replaced with our Constitutional Convention of 1787, which allowed for amendments. You should have a way to amend, because otherwise you have to pass another charter. There's also here transition and severability. If a future council or vote ever wants to end a charter, I couldn't find any evidence in California of a city going from a charter back to a general law, but you could put that in as a provision.
Okay, Jodi.
Okay.
How many of the positive issues that you raised that you could do under a charter city can be done under a general law city?
Oh, great question. Some of them could. I don't have a slide that actually looks at that because I felt that this workshop was under the assumption that the train was already moving in the charter direction. So I'm just trying to give you that. But yes, just like you could have an elected mayor without having a charter, you could have term limits or not without that. You could have an ethics commission without a charter. You could have a lot of the provisions for that. And, public comments and public engagement can absolutely be under a general law city, and we see that. We see lots of cities with those elements. So great question, many. And so I am going to jump off on that and say, those things you want, you could ask for now.
So my question is, we've had a lot of...
Just in case people watching.
Oh, should I say who I am?
Councilmember Shana Charles.
Mayor Pro Tem Shana Charles,
There we
actually.
go.
Hi. So my question, and this is something that's been brought up quite a few times, is that one of the things charter can do is change the rules around contracts.
Yes.
And change the rules around prevailing wages and those kind of things. Where would those be tucked in here? Would that be Article 5? I mean, I'm seeing a lot here on just elections and...
Yeah, so you don't have to have all of that, but a lot of it is departments, offices, and agencies. A lot of it would be under financial management for contracting, for prevailing wages, all of that. And this is not hard and fast. This is not concrete. Lots of charters don't have every single one of them. That's just a model chart.
So those would be the kind of things that maybe should be under transparency if people were interested in those issues, to make sure that it's transparent.
Absolutely.
What's happening with that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Hi.
I have a question back to the point about length. I know you kind of said, it doesn't matter, but I guess I'm curious that you would think a longer charter maybe has more guardrails or kind of more detail, but at the same time, that means the public has to go through hundreds of pages, which would suck. So what what is really a good practice here in terms of 530
Well,
seems
so-
ridiculous and 2 also seems ridiculous.
Yes, so those are extremes. And so, a lot of it, in the same way that when my students watch a city council meeting or a school board meeting, and it is very short, that can be good, a sign of a functional council that is, working together and is in agreement of the direction they want to go. Or if you've ever watched an Orange County Department of Education meeting where they have 5 out of 5 and they don't discuss anything and just approve terrible, awful things, that short meeting is bad and dysfunctional. So a short or long charter doesn't necessarily indicate anything, just like a charter is not inherently good or bad. And most of the longer charters don't start out long. And so if you have a charter, I think Placentia is 100 years old with their, they've had a charter longer than almost anybody. And so they've had to amend it a couple of times for, police cars. After auto, just the older your charter is, the more you have to update it. And so I don't know what the right length is, but I agree that I don't think anyone is imagining the Fullerton drafted charter at 200 pages.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I would assume if it came in at 200 pages, most people would vote against it. But I don't know. I don't know what the right length is.
Okay.
A lot of it depends on the trust and functional health of the city staff and the council and the relationship between the public.
Yeah. And I have a second question.
Sure.
Back to the process. I think I don't know, maybe I missed something or I'm still kind of
Sure.
unclear. So the city voted to have the council draft the charter, but it sounds like the path forward is to have this ad hoc committee where each council member has someone that they pick that.
So I'm going to just be precise in the language. 3 of the 5 council members, a majority, voted on the council drafted method with an advisory council. They didn't say 5, but I'm assuming 5 members of that advisory committee, that each council member would choose somebody to be on that committee, not restricted to their geographic districts.
Got it. And then those folks get together.
Yes.
And they draft the charter.
Yes.
Does the council having some oversight in part of those meetings?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sure.
And then they kind of come up with something that they all agree on.
Yes.
And then it goes to kind of the public.
It goes to the
look at.
public, a public hearing.
Public hearing.
And they can, but are not required to make changes based on public input.
Okay.
They could say, absolutely not, we don't want any of the changes you want. And then the second hearing would be repeating the first. Or a responsive council would get back into a room and say, hey, maybe we should add this Bill of Rights.
And if
or
they,
whatever.
If they can't come to an agreement, what happens
Well,
within that group?
So you count to 3, right? The rule of local government with 5 members is 3 is a majority, and so you count to 3, and that wins.
Okay. Even with the 5, let's say 5 members of the ad hoc
Yeah,
committee,
they're
they
just
don't really have any
representatives.
vote or anything.
Sure,
It's
they're just representatives.
Goes to the council.
Kind of in the same way that the appointed transportation commission, appointed by the council, could meet in their public meetings and say, we want jetpacks. And the council could say, no, you can't have jetpacks. So an advisory council or commission can make recommendations that are rejected by the council.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, get in line, get in line.
That was a really good question. I just have a follow-up
Yeah.
to that I was contemplating, which is thinking about all of the concerns about the charter and then what people would like to possibly see in a charter and about this mechanism of going through an advisory council.
Yes.
If you were going to appoint like the dream team of the advisory council to create a fair...
Oh, me personally?
Just in general.
I love power. I love
yes,
hypothetical
you
power.
or in general, from your expertise
Sure.
in public administration, who would you want to see appointed by council members to actually draft that charter or to serve on that committee? Like, who do you think is actually has the expertise to engage in that capacity?
I would like to see some representation, not all 5, but I would like to see some input from public administration, faculty, or our graduate students at Cal State Fullerton. We have in this education town an amazing resource of talent that study public administration theory, and they should have a voice on that committee. But I don't get to pick. But we have 2 students here, and the faculty at Cal State Fullerton's MPA program has said that they would make this video available for any Fullerton resident who's in the MPA program who wants to participate. Long Beach also has one, but Fullerton, clearly the better one, as their alma mater, as my alma mater.
And just to kind of reiterate, so the process of being selected onto that commission is individuals can apply.
So that was not articulated at the meeting, so I do not know. For those watching at home, this is Lucinda Williams, the city clerk of Fullerton.
So much for hiding in the back corner.
I know.
Sorry. No. You owe me lunch now. No. I'm Lucinda Williams. I'm the city clerk here in Fullerton. We took the council's action as direction to come back to a future council meeting, discuss how the committee is going to look, how the appointments are going to be. Are we going to do an application process? Are they going to have to file 700 forms, which I believe is a statement of economic interest, vernacular. That was the direction they want to go.
Sure.
I don't know if we're going to set a resolution or do it by minute order. It'll be the will of the council. I should say we. They.
Yes.
They.
Yes.
And hopefully I can get some direction on how they want to do the meetings. Because it's an ad hoc committee, there are no rules.
There are no rules. Yet. There will be rules. There are not rules yet.
I would assume that, again, this is my personal guess, so don't quote me on this too much, but probably be open to the public, probably be run pretty much like a Brown Act body with all the public meeting rules, but it will just depend on what council says.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Is this yours?
If you can put it back in the stand, that's helpful.
Hopefully this is good. So,
yes.
Jose Trinidad Castaneda. I serve on the CDCC commission that just submitted our recommendations for council approval, and former Buena Park City Council member. So I'm familiar with charter cities because I served on one. And my question is, the makeup of this room, and I'm assuming other engaged folks that pay attention to city council meetings, is probably not the same as the voting. It's not reflective of the voters, right?
Sure.
So I just want to make sure that for provisions that we put forward, there's no unintended consequences. Because when I was serving on city council, I was paid $13,000 a month, and I was paying
a year.
Woo. Thank you for that. So that was like pennies, right? And I was paying rent. I was a renter, and so you can only imagine that the economic pressures for young people to serve on a city council are not the same as for those who have had time to save up money and their financial health and all that, right? So I want to make sure that there's a balance of that.
Sure.
And so that's my question. How can we make that happen?
So just to be precise, when you said provisions that we put forward, we're not empowered in any way.
Any provisions that are put forward.
Right?
Yeah. Just in
general. Yeah. As much as I would love to seize the power that Jodi Vallejo gave me, it's as fictional as when I declare myself empowered by judicial review. Not true. So we're going to let the other question, because we're hitting time and I want to be respectful. So after this question, we'll turn off the camera and I will informally answer questions, but I want to be respectful of time because it's 2 hours on a summer Thursday when you could have been at the Farmers Market Beer Garden.
When we Molly asked about
yes.
general law, city, have we blown past that decision? Is that in our path?
So no, in that there are many points at which the voters could reject a charter.
Other than having the voters reject it.
Sure, the city council has not voted for the charter. That, to put it on the ballot, is summer 2026. Okay. So this workshop is under the assumption that the train is moving, but many trains do not reach their destination, and that is absolutely up to the people who have power.
Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you all for your participation. If the two of you could collect the evaluations for me, I would appreciate that. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you to Joanne and Jodi for leading the breakout sessions. Thank you to Gus for recording us, for the folks who aren't here. And I really do want to thank you for showing up. Public engagement and education is really important. So thank you.